An ex-soldier rescued a dying wolf in the woods, leading him to a hidden cabin filled with gold. The words echoed through Mason Reed's mind as he trudged deeper into the forest, away from the world that no longer made sense to him. 3 years since his discharge, and the nightmares still came, relentless as winter rain. The November air bit at his face, but Mason hardly noticed. Physical discomfort was nothing compared to the hollow ache that had become his constant companion. Fallen leaves crunched beneath his boots, a sound that still made him flinch, too similar to the crackle of distant gunfire that haunted his dreams. He'd come to these woods because they were empty. No people, no questions, no pitying glances when his hands trembled, reaching for his coffee. Just silence and solitude, the only companions he could bear these days. Mason adjusted his backpack, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. He'd told his sister he was going camping, reconnecting with nature. He'd said with a forced smile. The truth was more complicated. Every day in the small apartment felt like the walls were closing in, memories pressing against his skull until he couldn't breathe. Out here, at least, the prison was vast enough to feel like freedom. The light was fading faster than he'd anticipated. Mason consulted his map, squinting in the dimming forest. He needed to make camp soon. Finding a small clearing, he went through the motions with mechanical efficiency. Skills that had been drilled into him, now performed without thought. Tent up. Fire started. Water boiled. As darkness settled completely, Mason sat before the small fire. Flames reflected in his vacant stare. Back home, his medication sat untouched on his nightstand. Out here, there was only him and the weight he carried. "Happy birthday to me," he whispered to no one, pulling his jacket tighter. 32 years old today. His life before enlistment felt like it belonged to someone else, a stranger whose memories he'd somehow inherited. Teaching high school history, Sunday dinners with friends, plans for the future. A twig snapped in the darkness beyond his fire, and Mason's body reacted before his mind could process. He was on his feet, knife in hand, heart hammering against his ribs. Old instincts never really died. Just an animal, he told himself, forcing his breathing to slow. The forest was full of them. Nothing to fear. Nothing compared to what he'd already survived. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful. Mason tossed in his sleeping bag, fragments of dreams merging with memories. The desert heat, the sound of helicopter blades, the face of a young man he couldn't save. He woke at first light, dew glistening on his tent. For a moment, in that space between sleeping and waking, Mason felt a strange sense of peace. Then reality crashed back, the weight settling once more across his shoulders. Breaking camp quickly, Mason decided to go deeper into the woods. He had supplies for 5 days. 5 days of silence. 5 days to forget or remember or whatever it was he was trying to do out here. The terrain grew rougher as the morning wore on. Pine needles carpeted the forest floor, releasing their sharp scent with each step. Mason's muscles burned pleasantly with the exertion, a feeling that anchored him to the present. It was just past noon when he heard it, a sound so faint he almost missed it. A whimper, barely audible over the whisper of wind through the trees. Mason stopped, listening. There it was again. Following the sound, he pushed through a dense thicket of underbrush. The branches caught at his clothes as if trying to hold him back. When he finally broke through, he froze. In a small hollow lay a wolf, its gray fur matted with dark blood. The animal's sides heaved with labored breaths, yellow eyes fixed on Mason with a mixture of fear and resignation. A trap had caught its back leg, the metal teeth biting deep into flesh and bone. Mason's first instinct was to retreat. Wild animals were unpredictable, dangerous, especially wounded ones. But something in the wolf's gaze held him there. Pain, desperation, a silent plea that transcended species. "Easy," he murmured, though he knew the words meant nothing to the creature. He crouched down, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. The wolf growled weakly, trying to bare its teeth despite its weakness. Mason recognized the gesture for what it was. Not aggression, but fear. How many times had he done the same, snarling at those who tried to help, pushing away the hands that reached for him? "I know," he said softly. "I know what it's like." Carefully, he set down his pack and removed his first aid kit. The wolf watched his every move, ears flattened against its skull. Its leg was a mess. The trap had done significant damage. Without help, the animal would die here, alone in the woods. Mason had seen enough death. "I'm going to help you," he told the wolf, "but you're not going to like it." Getting the trap open would be the worst part. Mason found a thick branch nearby and placed it near the wolf's muzzle. As he'd hoped, the animal instinctively bit down on it when he approached the trap. "That's it," he encouraged. "Something to hold on to." With careful hands, Mason examined the mechanism of the trap. Illegal in these parts, some poachers' work. The thought kindled a spark of anger in his chest, the first real emotion besides numbness he'd felt in days. When he wrenched the trap open, the wolf howled, a sound of pure agony that echoed through the trees. Mason worked quickly, cleaning the wound with antiseptic wipes from his kit, wrapping the mangled leg as best he could. Throughout it all, the wolf watched him, its breathing ragged, but its eyes never leaving his face. There was something in that unwavering gaze that pierced through Mason's carefully constructed walls. Done, he said finally, sitting back on his heels. Best I can do for now. The wolf tried to stand, collapsed, tried again. Mason watched the struggle with a tightness in his throat. The animal managed to rise on 3 legs, the injured one held carefully off the ground. It took a stumbling step, then another. Then it looked back at him. Mason frowned. Go on, he said, making a shooing motion. You're free now. But the wolf didn't leave. Instead, it took another halting step away, then looked back again, yellow eyes intent. You want me to follow you? Mason asked incredulously. This isn't some Lassie movie, Wolf. Yet something compelled him to gather his things and follow as the animal limped deeper into the forest. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was simply having a purpose, however bizarre, for the first time in months. They moved slowly, the wolf setting a pace its injury would allow. Every few yards it would look back, as if making sure Mason was still following. The rational part of his mind knew this was absurd. Wolves didn't lead humans anywhere deliberately. Yet he continued on, drawn by something he couldn't explain. The forest grew denser. Mason checked his GPS occasionally, marking their strange journey. They were heading northwest, away from the hiking trails, into a part of the woods few people ever ventured. As the hours passed, Mason found himself talking to the wolf. At first, just observations about their surroundings, but gradually words he hadn't spoken aloud to anyone. Never thought I'd be following a one-legged wolf through the wilderness, he said with a wry smile. My therapist would have a field day with this. The wolf's ears twitched, but it continued its determined limping. I haven't seen Doctor. Winter's in 3 months. Mason admitted to the animal's back. She thinks talking helps. I think she's never had to live with the things inside my head. The wolf paused at a small stream, drinking deeply before continuing. Mason refilled his water bottle, watching the animal's awkward but persistent progress. You're stubborn, he observed. I'll give you that. By late afternoon, exhaustion was evident in the wolf's movements. Mason was about to suggest they stop when the trees suddenly thinned, revealing a small clearing. And in that clearing stood a cabin. Mason halted, staring in disbelief. The structure was weathered, almost blending into the surrounding forest. Moss covered portions of the roof, and the small porch sagged slightly on one side. But it was undeniably a cabin, miles from any marked trail or road. The wolf limped directly toward it, then collapsed on the porch with a soft whine. Is this your home? Mason asked, approaching cautiously. The idea was ridiculous, yet somehow less ridiculous than everything else that had happened today. The cabin door was closed but unlocked. Mason hesitated, years of training and instinct making him wary. But curiosity won out. Pushing the door open slowly, he peered inside. Dust motes danced in the beams of late afternoon sunlight that streamed through the windows. The interior was simple, a small kitchen area, a wood stove, a table with 2 chairs, a bed in the corner. Everything covered in a fine layer of dust, undisturbed for months? Years? Hello? Mason called, though he could already sense the emptiness. He explored cautiously. The cabin was well built despite its age. Shelves lined one wall, stocked with canned goods and supplies. A generator sat quiet in a corner. Someone had lived here once, prepared for extended isolation. In the kitchen area, Mason found a first aid kit far better stocked than his own. He gathered supplies, then returned to the porch where the wolf lay watching him. Let's do a proper job on that leg, shall we? This time, the wolf submitted to his ministrations without struggle, only whimpering softly when Mason had to clean deeper into the wound. He applied antibiotic ointment and wrapped the leg in proper bandages. You need rest, he told the animal when he'd finished. And food. Both of us do. Night was falling quickly. Mason made a decision. He'd stay just for tonight. The owner was clearly long gone, and the cabin offered shelter and supplies. In the morning, he'd figure out what to do about his unusual companion. He found dog food among the supplies. Strange for a cabin in the middle of nowhere, with no sign of a dog. The wolf accepted it eagerly, along with a bowl of water. Mason heated a can of beef stew for himself on the wood stove, the domestic activity feeling surreal after the day's events. The wolf watched his every move from its place by the door. Its eyes reflected the firelight, giving it an almost supernatural appearance. You know, Mason said between bites, I should probably be more concerned about sharing a cabin with a wild predator. The wolf simply laid its head on its paws, yellow eyes blinking slowly. But you're not going to eat me, are you? Not after I saved your life. Mason smiled slightly. There's a code, isn't there? Even among wolves. As darkness settled completely outside, Mason lit the oil lamps he'd found. The warm glow transformed the cabin, making it feel almost welcoming. After washing his dishes, he explored more thoroughly. A bookshelf held an eclectic collection: wilderness survival, philosophy, classic literature. Mason ran his fingers along the spines, wondering about the person who had assembled them. In a small desk by the window, he found a leather-bound journal. Opening it felt like an invasion of privacy, but curiosity overrode his hesitation. The handwriting inside was neat, precise. Journal entries dating back several years. Mason sat on the edge of the bed and began to read. The journal belonged to a man named Thomas Garrett, a veteran like Mason. Vietnam. The entries documented his journey from trauma to healing, his decision to retreat to the wilderness, to build this cabin with his own hands. September 15th, 1984. The nightmares came again last night. 40 years later, and the jungle still lives in my mind. Margie says I should see someone, talk to someone. But the only ones who understand are gone now. October 3rd, 1984. Bought the land today. 80 acres of nothing but trees and silence. The realtor thought I was crazy. Maybe I am. But I need the space, the distance. Room for the memories to spread out until they're thin enough to bear. Mason read entry after entry, the hours slipping away unnoticed. Thomas's words resonated with him in ways that made his chest ache. The descriptions of panic attacks, of isolation, of the gradual process of finding peace in the wilderness. It was as if Thomas had reached across time to speak directly to him. And then, nearly halfway through the journal, April 22nd, 1985. Found a wolf cub today, half dead by the creek. Mother nowhere in sight, probably trapped by the same poachers I've been finding signs of. Brought him home. Don't know the first thing about raising a wolf, but I couldn't leave him there. We'll figure it out together, I suppose. Two broken things. Mason looked up from the journal to the wolf who had fallen asleep by the door. Shadow, he said softly, the name he'd just read on the page. He called you Shadow. The wolf's ears twitched at the name, but it didn't wake. Mason continued reading, learning how Thomas had raised the wolf cub, how the animal had become his constant companion, how they had healed each other over the years. The entries grew more peaceful, more hopeful as time passed. January 10th, 1997. Shadow's getting old now. 12 years together in these woods. He moves slower these days like I do, but his eyes are still bright. Still watches everything. Still knows when the darkness comes for me. Still puts his head in my lap until it passes. Never thought an animal would understand me better than any human ever has. The final entry was dated 3 years ago. June 18th, 2020. Made my peace. The doctor says 6 months, maybe less. No point in hospitals and tubes. I've lived my life on my terms. I'll leave it the same way. Shadow understands. He always has. He'll be fine. He's more wolf than dog, despite all our years together. And I've made arrangements. The gold will wait for whoever needs it. Someone like me, perhaps. Someone who needs healing. Shadow will know. Mason closed the journal, his mind racing. Gold? Arrangements? He reread the final entry, trying to make sense of it. Driven by a curiosity he couldn't suppress, Mason began searching the cabin more thoroughly. Under the bed, behind the bookcase, in the small closet. Nothing that could be described as treasure. It was nearly midnight when he noticed it. A slight unevenness in the wooden floorboards near the wood stove. Kneeling down, Mason ran his fingers along the edges, feeling a seam that didn't match the others. A trapdoor. His heart pounding, Mason found the hidden catch and lifted the section of flooring. Below was a small storage space, and in it, a metal lockbox. The box was heavy. Mason set it on the table, hands trembling slightly. No key in sight, but the lock was old. Using a knife, he managed to pry it open after several minutes of effort. Inside, stacked neatly, were gold coins. Dozens of them. Mason picked one up, feeling its weight, watching it gleam in the lamplight. Each coin was marked as 1 ounce of pure gold. At current prices, this box contained a fortune. Beneath the coins was an envelope, addressed simply, "To whoever Shadow brings." Mason's fingers felt numb as he opened it. Inside was a letter, written in the same neat handwriting as the journal. "To whoever Shadow has chosen, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and Shadow has found you." He's always been a good judge of character, better than most humans I've known. If he brought you here, you needed to be here. I don't know your story, but I imagine there's pain in it. There usually is. The gold is yours now. Use it to heal, to build, to find your way back. That's what this place was for me, a way back. The cabin, the land, it's all legally set up to transfer to whoever finds this letter. My lawyer has the paperwork. His card is enclosed. All I ask is that you look after Shadow for whatever time he has left. He saved me in every way that matters. Maybe he can do the same for you. Trust the wolf. He knows. Thomas Garrett Mason read the letter 3 times, unable to fully comprehend what it meant. A fortune in gold, a cabin in the wilderness, a last request from a man he'd never met, connected to him through time and trauma, and the silent creature sleeping by the door. This is crazy, he whispered to himself. Completely crazy, and yet sitting in the warm glow of the oil lamp, with Thomas's words echoing in his mind and the wolf, Shadow, breathing steadily across the room, Mason felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Peace. He slept that night without nightmares for the first time since his discharge. Morning came with pale sunlight filtering through dusty windows. Mason woke to find Shadow watching him from beside the bed, yellow eyes intent. Good morning, Mason said, reaching out tentatively to touch the wolf's head. Shadow allowed the contact, even leaning slightly into his hand. Outside, the forest was transformed by the morning light. Mason stood on the porch, coffee in hand, found in the well-stocked kitchen, and took deep breaths of the clean, cold air. So what now? He asked Shadow, who had limped out to join him. The wolf sat beside him, surveying the clearing with watchful eyes. In the daylight, Mason could see the cabin properly. Despite its age and the years of neglect, the structure was sound. The clearing around it was overgrown, but had once been well maintained. A small garden plot, a woodshed, a path leading to what he discovered was a spring-fed stream nearby. The practical part of Mason's mind tried to make sense of it all. The gold could change his life, financial security, a fresh start. He could sell it, move anywhere, do anything. But as the day progressed, as he explored the cabin and its surroundings more thoroughly, another thought began to take shape. Shadow followed him everywhere, limping but determined. The wolf's injured leg would need weeks to heal properly, if it ever did completely. Mason had nowhere to be, no one expecting him back for days. I could stay, he said aloud as evening approached. Just until you're better. Shadow looked at him as if considering this proposal, then turned his attention to the woods at the edge of the clearing. A deer had appeared, grazing cautiously. For 3 days, Mason settled into a strange routine. He cleaned the cabin, wiped away years of dust, organized supplies. He tended to Shadow's leg, changing the bandages, monitoring for infection. He read more of Thomas's journal, learning about the man who had built this place as a sanctuary. On the 4th day, he followed a smaller path from the clearing and discovered a ridge overlooking a valley. The view stretched for miles, mountains in the distance, forest blanketing the landscape, a river winding through it all. Shadow had followed him despite the difficult terrain. The wolf sat beside him as Mason stared at the vast wilderness. It's something, isn't it? He said quietly. For the first time in years, Mason felt the weight inside him shift. Not disappear, never that simple, but shift as if finding a more manageable position. That night, he wrote to his sister using paper and pen found in the desk. Dear Claire, something unexpected has happened. I'm okay, better than okay, maybe. I've found a place that makes sense to me. A place where I might be able to breathe again. I need more time out here. Don't worry about me. I'll call when I can make it to town. There's a story I need to tell you about a wolf in a hidden cabin and a man named Thomas. It sounds like fiction, but it's not. Sometimes life is stranger than anything we could invent. I think I might have found a purpose here, or at least a beginning. Love, Mason. He had no way to send the letter yet, but writing it felt important, a commitment to what he was beginning to consider. The gold remained in its box on the table, untouched. Mason looked at it occasionally, thinking of all it represented, all it could do. But increasingly, the cabin itself felt like the real treasure. This quiet place where the constant noise in his head seemed to quiet. As days turned into weeks, Shadow's leg began to heal. The wolf graduated from lying by the fire to short explorations of the clearing, then longer ventures into the surrounding woods. Always returning to the cabin, always watching Mason with those intelligent yellow eyes. Mason established routines, chopping wood for the stove, cleaning and organizing the cabin, reading Thomas's books in the evenings, writing in a journal of his own, hesitant at first, then with increasing openness. 1 month after finding the cabin, Mason hiked to the nearest town, a journey of nearly 7 miles. He sent his letter to Claire, bought supplies, and made a brief call from the local diner. "Mason?" Claire's voice cracked with emotion. "Where are you? It's been weeks." "I'm okay," he assured her. "Better than okay. Did you get my letter?" "Yes, yesterday." "It doesn't make any sense. A cabin? A wolf? What's going on?" Mason smiled, watching people pass on the small town's main street. "It's a long story, but I'm staying here for a while." "Staying where exactly?" "In the woods. In a place that helps." He didn't mention the gold. That would complicate everything. "I'm doing better here, Claire. For the first time since coming home, I'm doing better." There was a long pause. "You sound different," she finally said. "I feel different." When he returned to the cabin that evening, Shadow was waiting on the porch. The wolf had grown accustomed to his absences now, no longer anxious when Mason left for short periods. "Missed me?" Mason asked, setting down his supplies. Shadow followed him inside, where Mason had started a project of refinishing the wooden floors. The physical labor felt good, productive, purposeful. As winter settled over the forest, Mason and Shadow fell into a comfortable rhythm together. The wolf's leg had healed enough for him to move almost normally, though he would always carry a slight limp. They explored the 80 acres that Thomas had mentioned in his journal. Mason found boundary markers, a small hunter's blind, a meadow where wildflowers would bloom in spring. He began to think of projects, repairs to the cabin roof, clearing the overgrown garden plot, maybe even building a proper workshop in the clearing. Plans for staying, not leaving. In December, after the first heavy snow, Claire came to visit. Mason met her in town, nervous about how to explain what even he didn't fully understand. Her eyes widened when she saw him. "You look range good," she said, embracing him tightly. "Healthy." "Feel healthy," he replied. "It's the outdoor life." He took her to the cabin, watching her face as she took it all in. The remote location, the rustic simplicity, the wolf who regarded her cautiously from the porch. "This is real," she said softly. "All of it. The wolf, the cabin. You're really living here." Mason showed her the journal, the letter, explained Thomas's story. He showed her the gold still in its box. "You could do anything with this," Claire said, looking at the coins. "Go anywhere." Mason nodded. "I know, but I think this is where I'm supposed to be." Claire stayed for 2 days. They talked more openly than they had in years. On her last night, sitting by the fire, she asked the question he'd been waiting for. What about the nightmares?" Mason poked at the embers in the wood stove. "They're still there sometimes, but less frequent. Less intense. And you're really happy here? Alone in the woods with a wolf?" He smiled. "I'm not sure happy is the right word, but I'm at peace. I can breathe here, think clearly." "And Shadow?" she asked, glancing at the wolf sleeping by the door. "He saved me," Mason said simply. Thomas wrote that Shadow saved him too, in every way that matters. I didn't understand what he meant then. I do now. After Claire left, promising to return in spring, Mason stood on the porch in the falling snow, Shadow beside him. The forest stretched white and silent in all directions, beautiful in its winter stillness. "We made it through," he told the wolf. "One season down." The winter passed slowly. Mason wrote regularly now, to Claire in his journal, even starting a memoir of sorts about his journey from soldier to recluse to whatever he was becoming. The words came easier with each passing day, as if the silence of the forest was teaching him how to speak again. In January, he began sketching plans for expanding the cabin. A larger porch, maybe a guest room for when Claire visited, a proper workshop. In February, he hiked to town during a break in the weather and filed the paperwork with Thomas's lawyer to legally claim the property. The attorney wasn't surprised to see him. Thomas was very specific. The older man explained. The property and assets would go to whoever found the letter and brought it here. He said the right person would come along, led by the wolf. "Did you believe him?" Mason asked. The lawyer smiled. "I've learned not to question the ways of old soldiers. They see things differently than the rest of us." By March, when the first hints of spring began to appear in the forest, Mason had made his decision. The gold would stay mostly where it was, security for the future. But he would use some to make this place a true home, his home. He marked the anniversary of finding Shadow, of finding the cabin, with a small celebration. Steak for both of them, a good bottle of whiskey for himself. To Thomas, he said, raising his glass to the journal that sat on the bookshelf. Thank you. Shadow watched him from his place by the fire, eyes reflecting the flames. And to you, Mason added, looking at the wolf, for leading me here, for knowing what I needed before I did. As spring transformed the forest, bringing new growth and color to the world outside, Mason felt himself transforming too. The weight he had carried for so long hadn't disappeared. It never would completely, but he had grown stronger beneath it, more capable of bearing it. One warm evening in late April, Mason sat on the newly rebuilt porch, journal in hand. Shadow lay beside him, basking in the last rays of sunset. In the clearing, the garden Mason had reclaimed from the wilderness was showing the first green shoots of vegetables he'd planted. I never thought I'd be here, Mason said aloud, looking out at the life he was building. Never imagined this was possible. Shadow's ears twitched at the sound of his voice. Thomas wrote that you knew, that you'd find someone who needed this place. Mason smiled, reaching down to scratch behind the wolf's ears. How did you know it was me? Shadow looked up at him with those ancient, knowing eyes, and Mason thought he understood. They had recognized something in each other that day in the forest. Two wounded creatures, fighting to survive. Two souls in need of healing. Mason opened his journal and began to write. An ex-soldier rescued a dying wolf in the woods, leading him to a hidden cabin filled with gold. But the real treasure wasn't the gold. It never was. It was this, the chance to start again. The opportunity to heal. The discovery that even in our deepest wounds there exists the possibility of connection. Thomas knew. Shadow knew. And now, finally, so do I. The wolf shifted, pressing closer against Mason's leg. Together they watched as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Two survivors finding their way by each other's light.